Bills so far this year, significant bills on a bipartisan basis, bills that came out of committee that had buy-in from both sides. But I think that's coming to a screeching halt this month because the majority leader is starting with the so-called paycheck fairness bill late this afternoon, which is essentially a giveaway to the plaintiffs' lawyers in America, a series of totally partisan bills designed to get no Republican support. So it looks to me like majority leaders decided that June is kind of the check the box month with all of the extreme left-wing provisions that they support that have been coming out of the House. Hopefully we'll sober up after that and get back to doing work together as we have done for the first almost 6 months of this year.
The Vice President is traveling to Mexico and Guatemala, we're told this week, to try and figure out what are the root causes of the immigration crisis. Unfortunately, the place she's not going is the southern border, which is where the burden is being felt by people on the border on a daily basis. We put an enormous amount of pressure, I should say, on our Border Patrol agents at the border. The Vice President's staff says that she is not responsible for the border. The President says he is not responsible for the border, which begs the question, I think, that should concern the American people, and that is who the heck is in charge of the border? We see on a daily basis what's happening down there, and I think if they want to get at the root cause of what's happening at the border, all they have to do is look at their reversal of all the policies that were in place prior to when they came to office. That is why we have a crisis at the border today. And to the leader's point, one of the things that the Senate could address is legislation, bipartisan legislation to deal with the border crisis. But Senator Schumer has determined that he wants to make a political point rather than to resolve problems for this country. And so this next month is going to be dedicated to his destined, designed to fail agenda, which includes a bunch of bills that he knows are not going to get across the finish line. But it's all about partisanship. It's all about playing political games, which is unfortunate. I think the American people expect better of us. They expect more of us. There are things that we could sit down and do, as the leader pointed out, and we've already done this year on a bipartisan basis. I would hope that the members of his caucus will come to the conclusion that they would rather legislate than score political points. But we'll see what happens over the course of the next several weeks.
The negotiations ongoing with the White House on infrastructure have hit a significant roadblock. Republicans are committed to working on infrastructure the way that most Americans think of infrastructure: roads and bridges and waterways, ports, airports, and broadband. The administration doesn't seem to want to go that way. They're ordering and including lots of things that are not what the traditional infrastructure ideas would include. They're focused on climate change, social welfare, those sorts of things, and they want to have massive tax increases to pay for it. We've seen that now coming from the administration. Republicans have been very clear we are not going to raise taxes. And American people would agree that the last time to ever raise taxes is when you're coming out of still trying to recover from a pandemic. One of the things the President is proposing is bringing back the death tax. Bringing back the death tax. For farmers, ranchers, small business owners, that would be devastating to them. I was at the Wyoming Stock Growers Association meeting in Wyoming with our ranchers and farmers last weekend. Some of them have had the same outfit in the family for 100 years. They call them the centennial ranches. And they know if this death tax is brought back the way this administration is talking about it, in case of a death, they would end up having the family would have to sell the farm or the ranch just to pay the taxes. This is nothing that people want, and that's why Republicans have axed the death tax successfully. The other thing this administration is talking about doing, they're saying there is hundreds of billions, $700 billion of owed taxes that have never been collected. So what they're proposing to do is hire an army of tens of thousands of IRS agents to go out and get the money. We know the IRS is the most powerful and least accountable of all the agencies of government. And they also want to go after energy production by raising taxes, which of course is going to hit energy workers as well as people who use energy, which is all Americans. So what the Democrats are proposing is going to hurt all Americans at a time they're not getting the infrastructure done that the American people are asking for. They want, we need. Mr. President, we can work together. We can solve the real infrastructure needs the American people think of as infrastructure. We can do it in a bipartisan way. We've made a number of offers. It's time for you to work with us.
Well, today the Rules Committee, the Homeland Security Committee, issued a report on January the 6th and what happened here at the Capitol. Senator Portman and I, working with Senator Klobuchar and Senator Peters to come forth with that report, really 5 months after that date, a 127-page report, 20 recommendations in the report itself, some to the FBI, some to Homeland Security, some to the Capitol Police, and then we referenced, with approval of the effort, they've gone through another 65 recommendations from the Capitol Police Inspector General. We'll have hearings next week in the Rules Committee with the Inspector General looking at those 65 recommendations. I think the one that requires legislative action would give the ability to the Chief of the Capitol Police, without the police board being involved in an emergency, to ask for outside assistance. I've thought for a long time that the police board barely functions at the best of times. And in a crisis, the police board, which is the Sergeant-at-Arms of the Senate, the Sergeant-at-Arms of the House, and the architect of the Capitol, all three have principal responsibilities that absolutely demand their attention in a way that they are unlikely to act as a police board to pay attention to the overall problem, because they've got their own responsibilities that day. That's a piece of legislation I believe that Congress will easily pass, and Senator Klobuchar and I will introduce that legislation next week. I think we can move quickly on these recommendations. They are the kinds of things that, with one legislative change and the kind of oversight that particularly comes through the appropriations process, we need to make not just one short-time emergency commitment to how we secure this building, but the kind of commitment that we can maintain year after year. I would say, in addition to the 18 people we either had extensive interviews with or brought to the 2 public hearings, we had input from over 50 members of the Capitol Police. And I think everybody in the Senate, everybody in the House, certainly the people on our 2 committees, left with even a heightened sense of appreciation for the courage that the officers had, the ability that they had under the worst of circumstances to do everything they could do. And of course, we're extremely grateful but saddened by the fact that 7 lives were lost either during that event or after that event, and many of our police officers continue to have significant problems because of what they faced that day, and really frankly the lack of equipment that worked, the lack of a plan that they needed, and so the decision of who's the next police chief, that will be decided by the police board, but we've encouraged the police board to reach out to the members, to the staff, to the Capitol community, but particularly to reach out to the Capitol Police as they look at what we need to move forward with these 20 specific changes in the overall structure and 65 specific changes we'll be talking about for just the Capitol Police in the next few weeks.
Spending is out of control here in Washington, D.C., and we don't have to look any farther than the Biden administration's budget proposal of $6 trillion. Now, because of this spending, we are seeing increased costs to our American families, things like milk and bread, gasoline, lumber. All of those things have increased with this administration's spending. We know, of course, to take care of that spending, what do we see? We see tax hikes in Americans' futures. That's what President Biden is proposing, and this would be detrimental to those middle-income wage earners, our family farmers in Iowa. Just as outlined by Senator Barrasso, a lot of them would see significant hits to their family farm operations, their ranching operations. So, folks, what we have to do, we have to come back together and work in a bipartisan way. We've been able to do this. The infrastructure bill has been part of that, trying to work together as Democrats and Republicans to do responsible spending for the American people. That's what we need to focus on. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, folks, but coming out of this pandemic, it doesn't do any good to hike up taxes, to continue spending the way we are in Washington, D.C. We've got to reopen the economy, get folks back to work, and do that as quickly as possible.
As Senator said, the Biden agenda is spend, spend, spend. So they should be known as big government, big taxes, big deficits, everything they're doing is ridiculous. Think about how much money we are going to collect. This year, we're only going to collect $3.5 trillion in federal receipts. They have a $6 trillion budget, and they want to spend another $7 trillion in programs. You can't do this. It's causing inflation. We already have debt in excess of our GDP. When debt is in excess of your GDP, you've got to dramatically grow your GDP to even pay the interest. So this is not sustainable. It's not good for families. Inflation's bad for families, and the tax increases are bad for families.
Leader McConnell, would you be open to supporting the John Lewis voting rights bill that Manchin and Murkowski have backed as an alternative to S1?
Well, as the majority leader said, the voting rights bill is intact. The law extends well into the future. What this rewrite of it does is grant to the Justice Department almost total ability to determine the voting systems of every state in America, which they're trying to do directly through H.R. 1. They would try to achieve indirectly through this rewrite of the Voting Rights Act. The Supreme Court did not strike down the Voting Rights Act. It's still the law. What they struck down was the pre-clearance part of it that applied only to the southern part of the United States, because the Supreme Court concluded the conditions that existed in 1965 no longer existed. So there's no threat to the voting rights law. It's against the law to discriminate in voting on the basis of race already, and so I think it's unnecessary.
Leader McConnell, the Democrats say the bipartisan report out today on January 6th is limited in scope. Did anything that you've read today change your opinion about the need potentially for an independent commission to get to the bottom of what happened?
Well, Senator Blunt just pointed out the comprehensive nature of this work done on a bipartisan basis, supported by both Republicans and Democrats, and done quickly. Had we chosen to establish a commission, we'd be haggling over appointments for the next few weeks. If you look at the history of these independent commissions, they take forever to make recommendations. What we needed was a quick solution to the problem on security and pursuit of those who broke the law, which the Justice Department assures me is going on very, very aggressively.
Following up, Leader McConnell, would you define the events of January 6th as an insurrection?
Look, I've said a lot about that already. I said it on January 6th. I said it again February 13th. I've covered that comprehensively, and I really don't think there's anything I can add.
Do you need a spending bill, a supplemental spending bill? Now that you have these recommendations, is there a need for a supplemental spending bill to implement these changes?
Well, what they did with the supplemental the House barely was able to pass was act before we knew what to do. And the importance of what Senator Blunt, Senator Portman, Senator Peters, Senator Klobuchar are doing is giving us a blueprint of how to spend the money wisely. So they put the cart before the horse, and now we have a credible report making serious recommendations about how to allocate our resources. At this point, I think it's worth discussing exactly what's needed to meet the conditions that we want to correct with the report.
Leader McConnell. Senator Blunt, let me ask you about the commerce hearing tomorrow morning.